and welcome to Breaking Down, the series where we take an in-depth look at a Fire Emblem unit from a gameplay perspective. Today we will be taking a look at the Crown Princess of Brigid, Petra. Whilst this series is not focused around plot, there is always a chance for spoilers, and certain elements of the game and its structure and story will inevitably be mentioned. So if that is a concern for you, feel free to give it a miss. Also, where relevant, this is considering the maddening difficulty on a regular new game file, with no exploits or excessive grinding. Before we start this one, for the sake of transparency, I have to make a small disclaimer. Petra is one of my absolute favourite units in the game, both from a character and gameplay perspective. Whilst obviously there is no intentional skewing of things here, subconscious biases can often be unavoidable and we won't always be aware of how they affect our opinions, so being open about when these may exist seems the easiest way to make sure things here are accurate. There are a couple of units I will probably do this for. I don't think my favoritism has any impact, and I believe this to be an objective assessment, but I'd rather be on the safe side, and I think when there are things in place that may be altering perspectives or viewpoints, even if care is being taken to ensure you aren't being influenced by them, it is important to be upfront about these so that those hearing the opinions are aware of all factors at play. Also, this will be long, since more familiarity and use of the unit just naturally gives me more things to say and specifics to go in on. With that out of the way, Petra starts in the Black Eagles, meaning that if you pick them as your house, she will be available from Chapter 1. For any other path, she will need to be recruited. As with most students, this can be done by obtaining a B support between Petra and Byleth, where she can then ask to join the protagonist's class on any day of the week. Alternatively, Petra has recruit requirements of dexterity and riding, which vary based on support level with Byleth. Whilst the dexterity requirement is pretty easy to hit, there are very few scenarios where you will want to train riding early on Byleth, so going for the B support rank here and just letting her request to join is probably desirable in most cases. Petra's personal ability is Hunter's Boon, giving her plus 20 crit rate when the opponent is below 50% health. This is way too situational to be an outright good or high tier personal. If most enemies are below half health, you would kind of expect to be killing them anyway without the need of a crit. There are a couple of instances where you can trigger it, such as when fighting monsters, or early on in the game when it may take multiple attacks to kill a unit and you can't reliably double, and you will probably take advantage of it a small handful of times in a playthrough. However, 20 crit is just a really small modifier for what is quite a rare situation. It isn't guaranteed to actually do anything, even when these conditions are met, and it would be useful. The way that battles work within the game also hurts this ability, with calculations being done before the combat starts and not changing mid-battle. If you could knock a unit from 60 to 40%, you aren't getting that bonus crit during that combat. This wouldn't make a huge difference, but it would allow for some more use cases if this were different. While there will be scenarios where this does help out, it's just beneficial too infrequently for it to be consistently useful. Petra does not have any crests, so will take 10 damage for each use of relic weapons and equipment. This should be largely unimpactful and nothing you need to worry about too much. If you feel it would be helpful to use a relic weapon, you can usually just eat the 10 damage. Moving over to Petra's skills, her spread of strengths and weaknesses is incredible from a class development perspective. She holds a boon in swords, axes, bows, and flying, with her only weaknesses coming in faith and reason, the two magical skills. For all intents and purposes, Petra essentially has no weaknesses. Faith and reason don't really offer anything you would want, so these being struggling areas doesn't matter in the slightest. A boon in axes is always incredibly useful, as a lot of good classes use this to certify, and when coupled with a flying boon, this allows for great access into the strongest combat class in the game, Wyvern Lord. On top of this, a bow boon is always desirable on physical attackers, as it allows for easier classing into Archer. This is pretty much all good all around. The sword boon isn't anything amazing, but access to Wrath Strike can be useful early on, and there are some builds that can make use of this. Whilst a couple of other areas would have appreciated strengths, lances or authority would have been truly wonderful, asking for more than this would honestly just be getting a bit greedy. Petra's only real issue with her skills is that a lot of her strengths don't actually give her anything overly useful outside of class certifications, missing all of the high damage combat arts for the late game. She does get one or two useful tools, but as an overall, this is really where Petra lacks in this department. However, the ease of which these skills let Petra jump around classes is incredibly beneficial, and on average, Petra's skills are a massive benefit to her. To switch over to Petra's stats, these have some standout areas and some more struggling ones. A speed of 10 is the highest base in the game, and a growth of 60% is excellent. She's easily one of the fastest units you have available to you and one of the only units with a strong doubling potential in maddening. While a strength of 9 isn't great, it isn't the worst either. Whilst not a strong area, it being off the baseline of 8 is quite nice. Luck, dexterity, and charm are all pretty solid. Nothing amazing, but they are good enough to do what they need to do and aren't really too impactful outside of this. Whilst these could be better, it wouldn't actually lead to much of a noticeable benefit. Defensively is where Petra struggles a little bit more, being quite frail and having relatively low HP, defense, and resistance. This means that you need to be careful with how you use her, however some of this can be patched up, which we will get into later. So how does this translate to actually using Petra? Well, for the first couple of chapters, Petra is a relatively decent unit, nothing outstanding but certainly capable of performing adequately. She is one of the few who has the base speed to consistently avoid being doubled providing you use an appropriate weapon, which can make her tankier in practice than units who have more bulk early on. One great example of this is that since the Black Eagles do not have access to Chapter 1 gauntlets, Petra is the only unit who can guarantee not to be doubled by Dimitri when she has an iron weapon, an iron sword to be specific, equipped in her own house, with Edelgard and Byleth being able to do this with a training sword. Due to its low weight, Petra can make great use of the mini bow early in the game and can often use it in conjunction with her speed to manage to avoid double attacks from even the faster enemies. Petra has a lot of options for builds, and all of these can lead to different paths throughout the game. I think the best way to approach this is to go through my preferred build with her, and then go through alternate options and how to use them at the end. So with that in mind, we will first be looking to build Petra as a dodge tank who utilizes Battalion Wrath. Now Petra can get a lot of tools that she can and will end up making use of. This gives her a lot of options in the early game. One of the most important things to note here is that Petra can potentially access both Curved Shot from bows and Tempest Lance from lances in time for Chapter 2. Curved Shot is a bow ability with a range of 2 to 3, as opposed to the typical 1 to 2, which also offers a boost of 30 hit and an extra point of damage. The additional range here can be highly valuable, as can the added accuracy. Tempest Lance is a lance-based ability, which offers a massive plus 8 damage as well as a slight boost to accuracy. In the early game, this is a frankly ridiculous might increase, which is highly valuable for any unit. Now, at least to my knowledge, getting both of these cannot be guaranteed, at least assuming standard efficient play and not showing ridiculous levels of favoritism and feeding Petra 8 million attacks, and also assuming not resetting for better tutoring sessions. However, it can be a huge help, and it is possible with a little luck, and even if you don't hit it, there is basically no risk in going for it, since both of these abilities are useful for a good chunk of the early game, and past this, these are skills you're going to want to use in the future. You will want to get these abilities as early as possible anyway, so you might as well try to get them in time for Chapter 2. Even if it fails, it doesn't matter. Curved Shot requires 60 bow EXP with a boon in the skill, whereas Tempest Lance requires 100 lance EXP without the boon in this area. So the most consistent way I have found to hit this is as follows. Start by setting Petra's goals to both lances and bows. Whilst lances would appreciate the 1.5 times growth from being the sole skill, this only gives 60 total XP over the 2 weeks as opposed to setting both, which gives 88. This puts Petra just 12 bow EXP away from getting Curved Shot. Due to her boon, she gains 3 per combat, so 4 bow attacks over Chapter 1 and the Forced Orcs battle will net you this, which is very easy to do and, to be honest, is probably more likely to happen than not. Lances will now be on 40 EXP, meaning a further 60 is required. Next up is the individual instructing. Instructing Petra 4 times in lances will grant her a minimum of 16 EXP, however the key word is minimum. It is highly likely you will come away from this with more than that. Greats multiply the gains by 1.5 times, and perfects double them. The first perfect will also grant an additional instruct, further increasing the gain. This does mean there is quite a lot of variance on how much lance EXP you will be on at this point. You will then get a further 28 EXP from the mandatory seminar, where we will be choosing Seteth. This is calculated based on the difference in lance ranks between the teacher and the student, and since Petra here will always be at an E+, while Seteth is at a C, this is always guaranteed to be 28. It is important to note that this is by far the best seminar for the Eagles anyway. Seminars affect 6 units, and they happen to have 6 units, including the mandatory ones, who can all make great use of lances, those being Byleth if she is a girl, Edelgard, Ferdinand, Bernadetta, Hubert, and obviously Petra herself. The other gain is authority, which is advantageous on anybody, meaning out of 12 skill gains, 11 or 12 of them will be in excellent areas depending on your Byleth's gender. This is just to show it isn't something being done to hyper-focus Petra and that hurts the rest of your squad, it's the best choice anyway. How much Lance EXP you will need from here will vary based on how well instructing goes. You may not need any at all if you got lucky, but it is more likely that you will need to pick some up from combat. If instructing goes as poorly as it possibly can, the maximum you will need here is 16 EXP, which is equivalent to 8 attacks. It is quite unlikely you will have this much combat with Petra without some favoritism, especially alongside the 4 bow attacks needed. 12 attacks across 2 battles would be quite a hefty amount, although it's not impossible even in standard play. However, needing this volume is also very unlikely, as this would require you to get 4 goods in the tutoring. Each great reduces the necessary battles by 1, and getting a single perfect reduces it by 2 from the double EXP, and at least 2 more from the additional instruction, meaning 1 perfect with 4 goods cuts this down to 4 lance combats being required. The biggest issue with this method would seemingly be that the one being left up to RNG is Tempest Lance, which is the more valuable of the 2 in my opinion. This is able to be played around though, since the individual instructions and both battles occur before the second week's tutoring, meaning if you get to this point and still need between 49 and 58 XP, you can set her goals to just Lancers, meaning you will get 30 instead of 20 from that week's tutoring, followed by the 28 from the seminar. In short, as long as you can get in 3 lance attacks between Chapter 1 and the Forced Orcs battle, by doing this you are guaranteed to hit Tempest Lance for Chapter 2 and can sacrifice Curved Shot instead, even if instructing goes the worst it possibly can, with this adjustment being able to be made at the last minute in case the battles don't give the XP you planned for, and if instructing goes well and battles go as intended, you're in a position to get both. The final thing to say on this is even if you don't hit these before Chapter 2, unlocking them during the chapter will allow you to use them since there aren't any other combat arts taking up the slots at this time, and even without this you will want these 2 abilities as early as possible anyway, as they add a lot to Petra's early game. That was a lot longer than it probably needed to be, but since I had the information to hand and I know how I normally approach this, I figured I would share it since that's kind of the point of this series. So let's move on past the first 2 chapters of the game. Once she reaches level 5, Petra will want to class into Fighter, which her bow rank will allow her to do after getting Curved Shot. From here, Petra has a lot she wants to do before reaching level 10, with your next priority being further bow investment, which you will want to get up to at least a D+ rank. Although C would be preferable to guarantee promotions, time can be a little stretched here. However, the boon and frequent use these can see in combat will help alleviate some of this pressure if you did want to go for the higher option. After achieving this, axes should be the next focus, which I would recommend pushing up to a C. Once at least D+ bows and C axes are reached, Petra is going to want to raise her heavy armor rank up to at least an E+, if not D. E+ is a very low investment, but means a certification has to be gambled, whereas a D guarantees it and doesn't require too much more. So once level 10 hits, what are all of these ranks for? First up is a certification into Armored Knight. This is purely due to the class bases, which are minimum values your unit stats are permanently raised to upon certification for said class. Armor Knight has a base defense of 12, which for Petra is going to be a massive increase of probably around 4 or 5 points. Considering all this requires that is off of the beaten track is a small heavy armor investment, this is more than worth it for what you get at the time. Next up is the class you will want to immediately be using, which is Archer. This is the reason behind the bow rank, and the benefit to this is that its mastery skill is hit plus 20. This can massively increase reliability by raising the unit's hit by 20 and is extremely desirable just for the consistency that it adds. Brigand is also an option here, as mastering it gives Death Blow, which grants plus 6 damage when the user initiates combat. This is a great spike once you immediately unlock it, however we won't be making use of it for too long, and the time spent in the class for the mastery is weaker than the alternative class options at this point. Whether or not you want to go for this is up to you. It depends on the strength of your team at the time and whether or not you think you will need that extra damage in the mid-game and whether that benefit from Deathblow will be worth the temporary deficit. Once you have qualified for Archer and also Brigand if you so choose and are in the process of mastering it/them, there are 2 main priorities: certifying for Pegasus Knight and obtaining Battalion Wrath. The former of these will only require Lancers to be pushed up to C, as Petra's base D flying already allows her to certify for the intermediate class. This grants Petra great mobility in the early and mid-game, and combined with the Armor Knight certification as well as her general stats, makes her a flying, fast, reasonably bulky, reasonably strong unit who is just an all-around great contributor to any team at this point. Pegasus Knight also grants Darting Blow on Mastery, which grants the unit an additional 6 speed when they initiate combat. Similar to Deathblow, this can be excellent while you work on other things even if you aren't using it in the long term, giving Petra a very strong chance of doubling on the player phase, further enhancing her power at this point. The difference here is that Pegasus Knight is actually the best class for Petra anyway, so you're going to unlock this by circumstance. The other target mentioned, Battalion Wrath, increases crit by a huge 50 points on the enemy phase when the battalion endurance of the unit is below 33%, and is acquired at a C rank in Authority. This can make Petra an enemy phase killing machine, especially when combined with some other things that we will gain access to later. Raising Authority is also necessary in general for allowing Petra to make use of better battalions. This is especially useful when we start forming the actual dodge tanking portion of the build. From here, making sure you can certify into Wyvern Rider at level 20 is the next step. This requires a C in Riding and a B in Axes. With boons in both of these areas and every combat also giving flying EXP, this should be easily attainable. The next step from here is obtaining the necessary tools to be able to effectively dodge tank. The first and most important of these is Alert Stance, obtained from the flying skill at B rank. This grants an additional 15 avoid when the user ends their turn with the Wait command. Whilst this is a sizable downside, it is a substantial avoid boost. This only further increases when A+ flying is reached, where the skill upgrades to Alert Stance Plus, doing essentially the same thing but granting 30 avoid instead. Now the obvious drawback here is that you can essentially no longer act on your player phase outside of moving, trading equipment, etc. This is a major downside, however the upside can be worth it. Another aspect that can help with raising Avoid is Authority, as this allows you to equip better battalions. The ideal one that you will want to use is the Secret Transport Force, which grants 15 Avoid and can be equipped at a B rank. It should be noted that this is a DLC battalion being obtained through Anna's Paralog, so if you do not have access to this, you may have to opt for something else. The Galatea Pegasus Co offering 10 Avoid at B rank can be a good alternative, just make sure you complete Ingrid's Paralog in Part 1 to obtain this. Whichever battalion you choose to go for here, you may want to start softening up its battalion endurance early, either with Petra or other units, before you actually want to make use of Battalion Wrath, so that it's ready for you to do so. Other things that can assist here are using an Evasion Ring, which gives 10 additional Avoid, and a high-level Prowess skill. On top of this, both master level flying classes grant an additional 10 Avoid through a class skill. Finally, Avoid is also influenced by attack speed, which Petra will have in spades thanks to her great speed stats. With all of these things factored in, Petra should basically be able to dodge almost every, if not every, attack that is thrown her way. So what about the other important aspect of this build, crit? Well, fortunately, this is incredibly easy. Battalion Wrath grants 50 crit, and use of a forged killer weapon grants an additional 35. From here, Petra's personal stats can push you up to that 100 that you are aiming for. Now, this doesn't necessarily guarantee a crit every time, as it is not enough to circumvent enemy crit avoid. However, as Petra's stats improve over time, this will only increase. You can also unlock the relevant weapon crit ability of your choice at the S rank of the respective skill to increase this further. Other than that, the only other step is to make sure you are ready to certify for Wyvern Lord at level 30, which once you acquire Alert Stance Plus, just involves pushing the Axe rank up to A. If you want to be utilising these as your weapon, which can be ideal since you will already be raising them and is my preferred choice, you will already be on track to do this. With all of this done, it essentially brings you to Petra's endgame for this build, with a skill setup of Alert Stance Plus, Battalion Wrath, Weapon Prowess 5, Weapon Crit plus 10, and Hit plus 20. My preferred weapon of choice here is axes, but you can go with bows if you prefer. Using this, you basically just want to throw her into the middle of as many non-gambiting enemies as possible, as she will dodge their initial attack and counter with a crit to kill them. This is why flying is so important, as it allows you to position her where you need her. One way to enhance this is by using a Retribution Gambit on Petra with another unit, allowing her to counterattack from any range. Unfortunately, this does not solve the problem of enemy Gambit users, but it does allow her to dispatch of ranged combatants. This leads to her being one of the most effective enemy phase units in the game, with easy access to an 8-move flying class for great positioning, and being able to move into a lot of what she needs to go through her boons in axes and flying, whilst also providing her with a very strong early and mid game. So what about the other build options? Well, let's start off with some of the other enemy phase choices. These primarily involve making use of other skills instead of the Battalion Wrath Alert Stance combo. These can include Vantage, which allows a unit to always attack first on the enemy phase when they are below 50% HP, Wrath, which is identical to the Battalion variant used in the build mentioned previously, except it also triggers off of health being at half instead of Battalion Endurance, and Defiant Avoid, which boosts Avoid by 30 when below 25% health. The biggest issue that I have with all of these is that they require setting up in battle in order to be utilised, since you need to get Petra's health to the threshold they require to activate them. On the other hand, they do have their upsides too. Notably, all three of them have access to a player phase, since they aren't reliant on alert stance, with it being replaced by Vantage or Defiant Avoid. However, they do have other drawbacks, such as the additional risk required by being on low health to activate the abilities, and the unlocking of these skills, which in the case of either Wrath Vantage or Wrath Defiant Avoid, requires mastering 2 additional classes. Personally, I prefer the previously mentioned setup of Battalion Wrath with alert stance, but I can see the merit in these. I just don't think the drawbacks quite compensate for it. The other option is to use Petra as a player phase unit. As previously mentioned, she doesn't really get any of the good skills for this, such as brave or high damage combat arts like Vengeance, Swift Strikes, or Point Blank Volley. But what she does get to allow this to be possible is very good stats and easy access to a lot of classes to grant her things she may need. One thing that Petra absolutely will want in a player phase build is the previously mentioned Death Blow. On player phase builds, this is absolutely essential. 6 extra damage output per attack is really big, and the time spent to get it is well worth it, as it will be serving you throughout the game. Due to her lacking a lot of the stronger player phase tools, the easiest way to get use out of Petra on the player phase is to attempt to quad hit enemies with brave weapons. Personally, I think this is easiest with the Brave Bow, since you can usually avoid counterattacks and Canto out. However, the Brave Axe is also quite a strong consideration due to its higher might. To increase the amount of enemies that you can double against, the weight reduction skills can be a good consideration here, taking advantage of the previously raised heavy armor rank. Weight -3 comes at a C rank in heavy armor and can really help doubling opportunities. Since the player phase build is less reliant on other tools, you can also consider pushing this up to a B so that the skill upgrades into weight -5. Whilst other classes can be considered for this, especially Bow Knight, I still think the best option is Wyvern Lord, with a build of hit +20, Death Blow, Darting Blow, weight -3 or 5, and either Bow Fair or a second dose of Axe Fair. The issue with this approach is that on Maddening you just won't be able to double everything, meaning that against some enemies you just don't have the damage output necessary to actually kill them off. It is worth noting that a good chunk of the faster enemies are flying, so you can still kill them without a double with a bow. The brave weapons are also heavier in weight and lower in might than a lot of other late game options, such as silver weaponry. However, their biggest issue is the sheer cost of maintaining them. Brave weapons are repaired using the rare material Woot Steel, and keeping these in working condition can be extremely awkward, especially if you're using more than one of them. Woot Steel is gotten through breaking all of the barriers of the giant wolves, or occasionally from Orcs battle rewards, as well as from a couple of one-time monastery quests. This means that you may have to go out of your way quite a bit to keep these repaired, which I personally prefer to avoid if possible. Whilst the player phase build is viable, it is not completely consistent, which is always problematic, and the high amount of resources needed to maintain it can also be a fairly large problem. As a lower investment option, Sniper can also be a valid consideration if you have other units who you are looking to pour resources into. She can access the class easily, and Hunter's Volley obtained from mastering the class provides the brave combat art that she lacks. However, outside of this, it doesn't offer her much else. Ultimately, I do prefer the enemy phasing Battalion Wrath dodge tank build, but if you want to go for a different choice, then they should still all serve you well. She makes for one of the best enemy phase units the game has to offer, and has a good amount of flexibility to explore other options if you need to. While she certainly isn't flawless, she has more than enough going in her favour for her to be a great asset to any lineup. I think her most standout route is Silver Snow, where you can really see her shine in the moments following Edelgard leaving, and she becomes a crutch you can lean upon after losing so much power, really hitting her stride when you need her to the most. I hope this helps you maximise Petra's usefulness in your runs, and thank you so much for all of the support on this series so far. It's been great to see how much people are enjoying it. Thanks for watching.